The second power that I wanted to focus on is actually going to be what is known as the tax and spend power. And this is probably the power that a lot of people get upset with, because this is specifically dealing with Congress's ability to tax your incomes and then ultimately be able to spend this money. Last week, if you remember, we talked about the budget, and the idea being that the federal government a few years back said that it spent about $24,000 per household and that it collected a little bit more than $20,000 per household. A lot of you really didn't feel good about this, but this is actually the enactment of the tax and spend power. Now, this is how it works. And let me give you an example of this. Remember what I said. If the federal government wants to pass a law, what they have to do is they've got to have a power in the Constitution to justify the passage of that law. So, to give you an example, is there a national drinking age? I'd say show of hands, but there's nobody here. Is there a national drinking age? Well, the person that's filming is nodding her head, yeah, there is. And the national drinking age is what?
21.
21. It makes sense that it should be 21, but is it a national drinking age? See, here's the thing. The federal government, believe it or not, does not have the power to require a national drinking age. Why? Because there's no power in the Constitution that grants them this. So this is what the federal government did a number of years ago, and this is actually about the time that I was getting close to 21. This is what the federal government said. The federal government basically went out and they said, every year, states, we are going to guarantee you X amount of dollars. Every year, we are going to guarantee you X amount of dollars as far as your highway funds. Now, having said this, the federal government came back and said, what we will do is we will give you X plus 5% more if you raise your drinking age to 21. Now, note on this, they're not saying, states, your drinking age has got to be 21. They're saying, states, if you want to collect X amount of dollars plus an extra 5% for your roads, then you're going to raise your drinking age to 21. Now, on the one hand, this probably sounds like a bribe. And what I mean by this is they're basically bribing the states to do what they want to do. Some folks would say this sounds like blackmail. Because when you think about it, if you're a governor of a state and you have the ability to gain $5 more dollars absolutely free, odds are you're going to take it. Who are you upsetting? Well, you're upsetting the 18, the 19, and the 20-year-olds, because those are the people that are no longer going to be able to legally drink if you make a 21-year-old drinking age. Well, when you think about it as governor, who are you going to try and satisfy? You're going to try and satisfy the people that vote. 18, 19, and 20-year-olds don't. So when you think about this, you're totally going to go for this. And the vast bulk of the states of the country did. When you think about it, today, almost all of the states have a 21-year-old drinking age. But there were some states that said, you know what, this is blackmail. You should not be basically trying to force us to do what we, basically trying to change our mind, to force us to do something that we don't want to do simply by buying us off with 5% revenue. This is blackmail in its finest form. And this is what the state of South Dakota argued. Federal government said, no, we're just using our tax and spend power. You, states, have the choice. We've guaranteed you X amount of dollars. We will actually give you X plus 5%, and we're just using our tax and spend power. We, the federal government, have the right to put conditions on the money. Put conditions on the money that we give you. And if you will not abide by the conditions, then we don't have to give you any extra money, and that's the bottom line. Now, Corey, think about it like this. Corey, let's say that your friend comes to you and wants to borrow 20 bucks, okay? Friend wants to borrow 20 bucks, and you go to that friend and you say, okay, I'm going to give you 20 bucks, but I don't want you to buy cigarettes. I don't want you smoking. You give the person 20 bucks, and then 5 minutes later, she's sucking down a couple of Newport Filter Kings. All right, question, Corey. Are you ever going to loan her money again?
No.
Why?
Because she disobeyed me.
Because she disobeyed, and that's probably the right way to say it for you. Here's my point on this. The federal government is saying, states, we have the right to put conditions on this money. And if you were to loan money to a friend and they did something that didn't follow those conditions, you wouldn't give them the money again. Federal government is saying, we've got a right to put these conditions on here as well. So with this in mind, we're going to continue this because this is our tax and spend power. What did the Supreme Court say? Believe it or not, the Supreme Court ruled with the United States government. And this is how they said it. They said, this is not a bribe, this is not blackmail, but if you offer X amount of dollars, which every state gives, plus an additional 5%, we're actually giving you an incentive. And it's perfectly logical, it's perfectly legal for the United States government to basically give these incentives and put these kinds of restrictions or guidelines on federal money. What the Supreme Court said that the federal government could not do is go X minus 5%. If the United States government has said, we will give you X dollars, but if you don't raise your drinking age to 21, we will subtract 5% from you. They said at that point, that is not giving anybody a choice, or at least not a real choice. That is basically punishing them. And they said in this instance, the Supreme Court did not attempt to punish. They attempted to give them an incentive, and this was perfectly legal. Understand on this, when you start dealing with constitutional powers, you might argue that a 21-year-old drinking age is necessary. You might argue that a 21-year-old drinking age is crap. That's your call on this. But basically, in order for the federal government to do anything, they've got to have a specific power in the Constitution, and in this regard, they use the tax and spend power to go ahead and justify a 21-year-old drinking age. Is it nationwide? No. It is done state by state. When I went down to Louisiana, and this was when I was 19 years old, Louisiana basically had an alcohol law that said that you could be 18 years old and buy alcohol in a bar, but you had to be 21 to be able to buy it at a liquor store. That's not why I picked that school, but indeed I did partake of that particular feature as I was learning within the Louisiana State Campus libraries, partaking of the sports and athletics and whatnot the case might be. But understand, Louisiana was a state that declined that extra 5%. They stuck with X amount of dollars. Think about one other thing. If you lived in Texas, Corey, if you lived in Mississippi, Corey, if you lived in Arkansas, Corey, and indeed you were close to the Louisiana border, and how old are you, Corey?
19.
19. What would you do on the weekend if you needed to drink?
Go to Louisiana.
Go to Louisiana. Louisiana probably made up that 5% and then some for all of the people that crossed state lines, because every person that crossed state lines was now paying Louisiana taxes, and they actually probably came out ahead above that 5%. One last thing to think about here. If you cross state lines, what other power could you conceivably have used to pass a 21-year-old drinking age? The commerce power. Because remember, the commerce power dealt with the exchange of goods and services, and it also dealt with crossing state lines. If you cross state lines to buy alcohol in another state that doesn't have a 21-year-old drinking age, the Congress could have used the commerce power to justify this, but indeed they didn't. They wanted to establish the tax and spend power for future cases.